coming up on the Sarc Fighter podcast.
This is not normal. Let's send you for a chest x-ray. And that's how my journey officially started.
Wow, chest x-ray. So your ankles hurt, so the first thing they do is send you for a chest x-ray. Garrie Farrow's sarcoidosis just keeps getting worse.
And so, in the past 5 years, skin, eyes, bones, and now I lost hearing in the left ear.
And yet she is fighting back, staying active, and helping other Sarc patients overcome their illness.
This is the Sarc Fighter podcast, living with sarcoidosis and other rare diseases. Here's your host, John Carlin.
Hello and welcome. This is episode 62 of the Sarc Fighter podcast, brought to you in part by a grant from A-Tire Pharma. If you have pulmonary sarcoidosis and are between the ages of 18 to 75, you may qualify for this new clinical trial. The Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research is excited to be partnering with Novartis for a research study to test an investigational treatment that may help those living with pulmonary sarcoidosis. This opportunity is not only taking place in the U.S., there are also international locations available. Visit www.stopsarcoidosis.org to learn more and see if you qualify. For participating international locations, check out clinicaltrials.gov and then search sarcoidosis CMK 389. And there will be a link in the show notes to make this easier for you if you're looking for direct contact via stopsarcoidosis.org. Hi guys, welcome to the Sarc Fighter podcast, where I tell you kind of what sarcoidosis is all about. Sometimes we'll take a deep dive with doctors or researchers. Sometimes it's listening to patients talk about their experiences. But I find that not knowing about the disease, what to expect, what's quote-unquote normal, what are the side effects of the drugs we take, what's fact and what's fiction, sorting that all out is what I'm trying to do here on the Sarc Fighter podcast. I go straight to the people whose lives have been affected by it, or on the other hand, the people who are trying to fix all those problems. And we hear directly from them, and I try to ask everybody the questions that you would want to know if you could talk to them. And if you listen to the podcast, I think we're doing a pretty good job of sorting it all out here for you without being extremist, without being scary, beyond just how scary the disease actually is. I hope it's real. I hope this is where you are finding what you want to know about sarcoidosis. You might want to go back actually and listen to the previous episode. That's where I talked about expectations in your life once sarcoidosis has unfortunately found you, as it found me. I was diagnosed in 2016 and probably was dealing with it for several years before that. So just how your life changes and how you look at, this is an overused term, but your new normal, and kind of figuring out what that's all about. So expectations was in the previous episode. The episode before that, episode 60, where Jack Bepley describes how cardiac sarcoidosis knocked him back from feeling fine and fit to a scary hospital stay and an experience that literally still gives him PTSD. So you might want to go back and listen to that one as well. And in addition, here on the Sarc Fighter podcast, we talk about the many areas where the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, based in Chicago, is helping address all of the areas where Sarc touches your life. That could be support groups, it could be research studies, fundraising to help fund that research, or new findings along the way. I heard an expression this week that you may have heard before, and it speaks to the difficulty in dealing with and diagnosing sarcoidosis. Have you heard the expression, if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras? So what does that mean? Well, if you're, say, a police investigator and you've got a bunch of clues in front of you, and those are the hoofbeats. What it's telling that investigator is to look for the obvious answer, not the difficult, maybe not so apparent answer. So the obvious answer is if you hear hoofbeats coming, it's probably horses. Unless you're in Africa, it's probably not zebras, right? And so now you're a doctor and a patient comes in and they describe their condition. Well, the doctor is not going to automatically lean into a rare disease. They're going to go for the common causes of that problem. So they're not going to be looking for zebras. They're going to be looking for horses, which I think probably they should be doing. But if you have sarcoidosis, that's frustrating because it's not on their radar, right? We are the zebras. Those of us with sarcoidosis are zebras. And so these are hoofbeats when zebras are actually coming. And I would say that if there is a takeaway now after 60 plus segments here on the podcast and talking to all these people I just mentioned, it's frustrating for patients because the doctors don't look for zebras. And sometimes, even when the zebras are almost trampling them, they can't see them because they're so intent on looking for horses. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So here on the podcast, we have to shine a light on the zebras as much as we can. And we have to kind of take the advice that we're hearing over and over, which is to go to a clinic that specializes in sarcoidosis, where the doctors are used to seeing zebras. Let's think these doctors are maybe in Africa. I actually had a chance to go on an African photo safari a couple of years ago, and there were zebras literally right outside my hotel room, And so to the people who were there and saying their zebras are an everyday thing, right? Well, for the doctors who specialize in sarcoidosis, zebras are an everyday thing. So just something to think about. If you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras, unless you have sarcoidosis. How's that? All right. The good news is that progress is being made. More and more doctors are becoming aware of sarcoidosis thanks to lots of work from the various agencies, not the least of which is the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. But on the medical front, as you know, the Sarc Fighter podcast is brought to you in part by a grant from aTyr Pharma, which is now working on a drug they can officially call EFZO-FIT, which is short for efzofitimod, and the drug aims to replace or at least reduce the need for prednisone right now in pulmonary patients. And on May 17th of 2022, the company issued a news release with more positive findings. All of this is coming out of the May meeting of the International Thoracic Society in San Francisco, where aTyr presented two posters. When you go to these big medical conferences, poster sounds like something you do for 8th grade when the teacher tells you you've got to have a project. But that's what they do at these medical conferences, and the posters are actually a big deal because they are presenting to other clinicians the results of a lot of research, and a ton goes into it. Millions and millions of dollars and years of research goes into the presentation of these posters. And I'm just going to read you one paragraph. It gets a little clinical here, but it's not too bad. I'll read you one paragraph from the news release that was issued on the 17th of May here in 2022. It says, efzofitimod was safe and well tolerated and demonstrated dose-dependent improvements in key physiologic and quality of life measures in the context of a steroid taper, which, according to medical experts, is the first study of any therapy to do so in pulmonary sarcoidosis patients, said Sanjay S. Shukla, MD, MS, President and CEO of aTyr. It says, quote, based on these findings, we are advancing efzofitimod to a pivotal phase 3 study, which we expect to initiate in the third quarter of the year. That's 2022. EFZO-FIT, a global multi-center study to evaluate the efficacy and safety of efzofitimod in patients with pulmonary sarcoidosis, will be the first study in this patient population to evaluate steroid reduction as the primary endpoint and presents an opportunity to deliver transformative therapy with clinically meaningful outcomes to those patients. So the bottom line is that in all the studies so far, it appears that EFZO-FIT works, and they are now ready to go to phase 3 to see if it continues to work in a larger study, and that the idea here is that EFZO-FIT works when you reduce steroids, prednisone, and then use EFZO-FIT. Patients still have a positive outcome. Now, if you've been listening, you may recognize the name Dr. Sanjay Shukla. He's the CEO, as I said, and he's made 3 previous appearances here on the Sarc Fighter podcast as he's been walking us through the progress with this drug. And he did reach out to me this week to let me know that they had released more data and that this news release had been posted. And so now I'm in the process of working with his scheduler to get another interview, and I expect that will happen sooner rather than later. So this is very exciting, a very exciting development in the fight against sarcoidosis. And you guys, you know if you listen how much I love to talk about how much prednisone can ruin your life, because I was on 80 milligrams, which is a lot, for several months back in 2019 as doctors tried to get me under control after a flare. And yes, it controls the disease. It got my flare under control, but the side effects are terrible. They can be long-lasting depending upon how long you're on prednisone. So if this EFZO-FIT can replace steroids or reduce steroids, prednisone is a first line of defense. That would be a huge step forward. So great news. Stay tuned for that interview. You might want to go back and listen to episode 45 where Dr. Shukla talked about how and why EFZO-FIT is showing so much promise, how it works in the body, and what it does to give us the opportunity to perhaps replace prednisone down the road. That would be a huge development. Okay, my guest today, however, is Garrie Farrow. She joins us from her home state in Florida. She lives in Tallahassee. And Garrie is an inspiration because she's been fighting Sarc for 15 years, and it has slowly been creeping from her lungs to other parts of her body, and she's going to tell us all about that. She's not shy about sharing the details. She's still fighting the disease, but she is still working. She is on, in fact, several committees for the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, so she is giving back. While she's fighting it, she's also trying to help the rest of us cope. And I will tell you that her family had an extremely significant sarcoidosis event. That's not my story to tell, that's hers, and she will reveal that during the interview. So my interview with Garrie Farrow is coming up next.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the Sarc Fighter podcast. You may be wondering, what can I do to help? How can I be a part of the sarcoidosis solution? It's simple. Make a donation to KISS, Kick In to Stop Sarcoidosis. 100% of the money goes to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Look for a link in the show notes of the Sarc Fighter podcast. Welcome back to the Sarc Fighter podcast, and joining me now is Garrie Farrow, who plays many roles within the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research as a volunteer and is coming up on 16 years as a Sarc survivor. Garrie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today.
So you said it's 15 years plus, almost 16 years, and you knew the anniversary date, didn't you?
It's actually August. I started getting my appointments in April. So for me, April's the anniversary, but I didn't get the official diagnosis until August, 16 years ago.
16 years. That's a long time. And I want to hear about, when did you first know something was wrong?
Honestly, I knew something was wrong 20 years ago. I have a thing that I love cute shoes and purses, and I had these fantastic boots that I love to wear. They were the greatest thing ever. And my feet and ankles started to swell. And I used to play basketball in high school, so I'm used to ankle sprains. I know what my feet and ankles will do, but this was not normal. So probably about 4.5 years in total of going to different primary care doctors. And I am a taller, larger woman. And so I've always been told, well, you need to lose weight. It's like I exercise every day. I'm not losing any more weight, but they were saying the reason my feet and ankles were swelling was because of the weight. So I went and lost more weight, still couldn't wear the shoes. Moved to a different city, found a new primary care physician. Actually, my second one here in Tallahassee was the one who went, this is not normal. You are about 30, 31 at the point. This is not normal. Let's send you for a chest x-ray. And that's how my journey officially started.
Wow, chest x. So your ankles hurt. So the first thing they do is send you for a chest x-ray,
Yes.
Which wouldn't seem intuitive, but I guess the doctor must have been thinking pulmonary sarcoidosis then.
She kind of mentioned, she goes, it could be your lungs, it could be your heart. She goes, for your feet and ankles to be swelling, there's something vascular going on and we don't know why. She goes, I'm listening to, just using a stethoscope. I'm listening to your lungs. It sounded fine. You're exercising. You're not complaining of any shortness of breath. So let's figure out what's happening with you.
Okay. And so was that conclusive, or was that just the next clue?
The chest x-ray was the next clue. They realized at that point, because you could see my lymph nodes on x-ray, and the lungs looked suspicious. And at that point, I was sent for a mediastinal oscopy, basically a lymph node biopsy. Ended up with a brand new scar, and that's where they definitely confirmed that, yep, this was sarcoidosis. Because after the chest x-ray, they said this could be leukemia or sarcoidosis. The way I remember it was I heard leukemia and possibly sarcoidosis, and the leukemia scared me because I hadn't heard of sarcoidosis before in any major detail other than Bernie Mac. So,
right.
But yeah.
So after they figured out it's sarcoidosis with the lymph node biopsy, then did they start with the normal prednisone routine?
No, I was seeing a pulmonologist local to my city, and I was told it was stage 1, the 4 stages. And since I was at stage 1, I had no other symptoms happening. There was no reason for me to go on any medications. And that if I ever started coughing or becoming short of breath while exercising, to basically come back. And I had one appointment a year later, everything's still the same, but at no point was medication even talked about. I did go back to my primary and asked, okay, now I've been diagnosed with sarcoidosis. What does that mean? And she told me she didn't know. She goes, I could tell you this much of what I remember from medical school. I can't answer any of your questions. Go back to the surgeon. And went back to him, and it was, yeah, you have stage 1, but that's good because, 4 is horrible. You're at 1, so there's nothing to do. My current pulmonologist, who specializes in sarcoidosis, she said, no, stage 1 is no better than stage 4. You had symptoms. You just weren't coughing. She goes, your lungs did not look good. There should have been some treatment started then. But that took I think it probably was about another 3 to 4 years before I started any official treatment.
That just amazes me. And I'm curious about this stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, which is the terminology that we're used to hearing for cancer patients. And I've heard other Sarc patients that I've interviewed on the podcast talk about it a little bit. No one has ever used that term with me. Can you describe the difference between stage 1 and stage 4?
I was
Other
told
than that it's worse?
yeah. What I was told originally was that, yes, my lungs were cloudy, but they were not completely infiltrated. And you could see my lymph nodes on x-ray. Stage 4 is pretty much you're on oxygen. The lungs are completely gray and looks like ground glass, completely covers the entire lungs at stage 4. Is how it was described to me initially, that each stage your lungs get a little cloudier, a little bit more ground glass until it gets to the point where you're not able to breathe. What I've been told recently and, confirmed with more research is that yes, the stages do impact how the lungs appear, but you could be on oxygen at stage 2. You could be walking around not fine, but without oxygen at stage 4. It's just showing what the impact on your lungs looks like when you're just trying to look at the x-ray or the MRI or CT. And actually stage 1, I believe, only includes the lymph nodes. And any of the others only impact just what the lungs look like.
So you and I are both on a number of committees with the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. And what I'm hearing, and maybe you know, maybe you don't, but what I'm hearing is this stage 1 through 4 may be just reserved for pulmonary patients, because everything you've described is lung involvement. Whereas like with cancer, my understanding is when you have stage 4 cancer, let's say it starts in your kidneys or whatever, it then has spread to other parts of your body and it's metastasized. And that's so when we talk about stage 4 with sarcoidosis, we're not talking about it spreading to other parts of your body, even though that can happen. But that's not what the stages describe.
Exactly. Which I find interesting, because it would make more sense if they actually classified it that way as they do in cancer. Because technically, thankfully, due to one medication, my lungs are clear and my lymph nodes have shrunk in size from being, really big to not being as big. But I've had other organs be impacted by sarcoidosis. So to me, following the cancer way of being, I'm probably more of a stage 3. Just because I have multiple organs impacted by sarcoidosis. So yeah, but currently it's only for lungs.
Got it. All right. And is it still currently, after almost 16 years, is it still just in your lungs, or has it spread?
It spread, and it actually took it took about 10 years to spread. Started with, I noticed some skin issues. Went to my local dermatologist, and first I was told eczema, then I was told psoriasis, then I was told I had both. Went to a sarcoidosis dermatologist and was like, no, this is sarcoid. That's what this is. And so, yeah, in the past 5 years, skin, eyes, bones, and now I lost hearing in the left ear. So fun times. Yeah. And that's on immune suppressors.
You said after about 4 years, a doctor said, oh, no, you need treatment.
Yes.
What treatment did they come at you with first, and how has that progressed?
The lovely steroids. I was on 60 milligrams for about a year and a half, a little under. And that, of course, weight gain, pre-diabetic, hypertension, you name it, the moon face, all of it, was taken off of that because of the impact. But at that point, there still was not a lot of discussion about new medications. And it was pretty much, okay, your labs look good. We're just going to kind of watch you. Then the eyes started, the skin. So then it was steroid injections directly into the skin and steroid creams, which thankfully no over whole body impact. Then when the eyes and the bones kicked off, that's when I was put on methotrexate. No steroids at that point, thankfully. But then when the bones kicked off, that's when they said, okay, I started low dose steroids, and that's 5 milligrams for 3 years. That pushed me over the edge with the diabetes. And let's see. At that point, I think it was year 2 is when I went back, because by that point I'm taking metformin. And even though they said 5 milligrams of steroids, you shouldn't be gaining weight. So 60 milligrams, I gained 80 pounds. Finally, after not being on steroids for a while, I had lost about 40. Started the low dose, and they said, you should be fine. 5 milligrams is not going to impact you. I probably ended up gaining back 30. And so after year 2, I said, okay, look, I need a switch because steroids and I are not working out. You're telling me I need to lose weight. I'm doing the things I need to do. And yet my weight is not going in the right direction. It's still creeping up. So that's when I was taken off the steroids and put on leflunomide. I believe I'm saying that correctly.
Okay.
But yeah, and I had to take off methotrexate and switch to Humira, which didn't work because of the bones. And I'm now doing Remicade infusions or infliximab infusions with the leflunomide.
Remicade, and is that working?
So far, I'll actually go in June to get repeat x-rays of my fingers. They showed no further damage is what it was last year. So we're hoping it remains the same.
Now we've kind of just jumped right to, I want to hear more about your eyes and your bones.
Sure.
When you have sarcoidosis in your bones, what does that look or feel like? How do you know it's there? What is the deal?
I know it's kind of hard to see on camera, but it's the fingertips of these 3 fingers are actually only about 2 times the size of the fingers on this hand. And what started off as just a finger swelling then turned into, I would go to pick up a pen or I'd go to pick up my purse or anything. And I could literally feel something crunching in my fingertips. And I was just like, weird, because how every once in a while, your fingers might pop or, you crack something. But I went, no, that is literally in the fingertips. I went to my local PCP and he told me it was finger clubbing due to sarcoidosis and lack of oxygen. My sister actually had finger clubbing. She was diagnosed after I did because I pushed her. And so I've seen what finger clubbing looks like, and all her fingers were impacted.
I've never heard that word before. I've never heard that word before. Finger clubbing.
Yes.
Your fingers look like little clubs.
Yes. I don't know if you can kind of tell on camera. You see how this one's more rounded than the other?
Yeah.
It actually becomes very bulbous is the other word that they like to use. And your nail bed actually changes shape, where instead of being just if you look at your hands, just regular nail bed, they actually expand, because since the tip of your finger is getting bulbous, your nail bed has to go with it. And it actually started splitting because my nail bed couldn't keep up with the growth of the finger. So it was splitting. And as I initially pushed back, because I told him, I said, every time I come to see you or see my specialist, my oxygen gets recorded at 98, 99%. I'm not wheezing that I'm aware of, and nobody's told me otherwise. And I've had breathing tests. And if that was the case, all of these should be bulbousy and look funny. It is literally these 3. Went to see my pulmonologist, and I was on methotrexate. And so they were really concerned about any of the other side effects that methotrexate could have. And she goes, okay, is there anything else going wrong with you? Because your lungs look great. I don't normally see patients like you because, pulmonologist, so I'm not used to seeing healthy lungs anymore. Anything else going on? And I went, look. And she goes, that is not normal. And I haven't seen that with methotrexate patients. Let's send you for a hand x-ray, which then morphed into a whole body bone scan. And I now have a rheumatologist because they realized that On x-ray, my fingertips, all of them actually, but these three are the worst. My body is attacked the bones to the point to where it is broken down and my body's reabsorbing the bone. So the reason there's swelling is because there's fluid, and that's what causes the swelling. And I actually have 4 toes involved as well, but all of them, you can tell all of them have been attacked. It's just these 3 were hit the worst because I dropped a box on them while moving.
Sorry, is it painful? Not dropping the box, but I'm just walking around every day with your toes, and does it hurt?
Yes. It depends upon what I've done that day. Some days are worse than others. I am a trainer, so I constantly typing, and I love playing video games. So playing video games, typing certain things, there are days where I don't want to use my fingers. It's not worth it. Or I have become very adept at using my thumb and my ring finger on the right hand, because it's, I don't know, it's not sensitive to touch per se, because like doing this does not hurt, but actually going to grab something, it's, unless I can figure out a way to grab it down here, it's, think of the worst bruise that you've ever had. You know, you'll get that, you've hit it just right, and it doesn't really hurt until you get it in the right place. That's what it feels like.
Okay, let's talk about your eye.
Yes.
So how what were your symptoms?
Initially, just a lot of redness. Tallahassee known for pollen. And so I just put it off that it's the pollen. It is the green season, and it's a lot of redness. And then the not conjunctivitis, but the outside of your eyes were constantly inflamed, felt like I had dirt in them. And again, pollen, I just pushed that off. It wasn't until I have glasses that actually, with the tint, I just lost the name of it, that you go outside in the sunlight and your lenses will.
Yep. They get darker. Yeah.
I walked outside, even with that on, literally stopped in my tracks, shut my eyes, and was like, oh my God, the sun's too bright. My eyes literally hurt. The only way I could describe it is like a shooting pain through my eye. And I stood there just going, oh my, okay, this isn't normal.
When was that?
Sorry?
How long ago was that?
That was probably about 6 years ago. About 6 years ago. And again, went to my local eye care provider, and it was like, this is iritis, and was prescribed steroid drops. Then it continued, and I was diagnosed with uveitis, and ended up getting referred to an ophthalmologist, because I kept going to my optometrist because, of course, my glasses. And they're like, this is this is a sarcoidosis issue, not just, you have recurring eye infection. And so that's how the eyes joined up. Wow.
Is that controlled?
Currently, yes. Thankfully, with the eye drops, that I think I was on the eye drops for about a year, and I go back in right now. I'm thankfully, because my last exam came back fine. I'm set to not have to see them for a year, but when my eyes are unhappy, I probably see the ophthalmologist about every 3 months. And drops and tests, I do, because of the last one, have a cataract? No, beginnings of a glaucoma in one eye because of the recurrent flares in my eyes. So we're kind of watching that.
You said the magic word flare, which is what a lot of sarcoidosis patients fear.
Yes.
You get everything under control, and then all of a sudden you wake up one day and things aren't right, and the sarcoidosis has become active wherever it is in somebody's body. So when you just use the word flare, are you talking about flare as in bright light hitting your eye, or a flare up of the sarcoidosis in your eye?
Flare of the sarcoidosis in my eye. For me, the pain it feels like a flare of a light in my eye, but my body has flared itself. There's something in my immune system that has gone into overdrive and done its attack like it usually likes to do.
You mentioned Humira, and that didn't work, you said, because of the bones, I think is what you said.
Yes.
What is the connection between Humira and bones?
Actually, none. The only reason I was put on Humira, it was an experiment because the methotrexate obviously worked perfect for the lungs, but because my bones were starting to go, she was like, okay, we can't put you back on steroids, obviously. So what can we do? And at that point, Humira it wasn't officially approved for off-label use, but it was showing some impact on the immune system with patients that had Crohn's disease and really severe, I believe, IBS. And I apologize if I'm incorrect on that one, but it was definitely used in Crohn's. She said, okay, let's try something because obviously your body is still in overdrive. Let's find a different method to shut off your immune system. Humira was picked because there was another medication, and I'm blanking on it right now, that again, it was another off-label cancer medication, but there were so many other side effects. And one of them, because of where my weight and my diabetes were, she was really hesitant to use that one. So that's why Humira was used. And it was just a test to see, would it help with my fingers? Because at this point, my options were limited.
And you ran it, what, for 6 months?
I was on Humira actually a year. Because they said it's 6 months just to figure out if things are going left or right. And the first 6 months was to make sure my lungs did not re-engage, for lack of a better word, change in how they were going. The bones after 6 months at least didn't show further damage. They were like, I'm never going to regrow the bone, but at least it didn't look like it had gotten worse. The reason I had to switch from Humira to the infliximab infusions is the bones remained where they were, but then I lost the hearing in the left ear, and they're like, okay, so obviously something is not quite right again. So, Humira kind of stabled things, or at least shut off my immune system enough, but not enough. So that's why I'm on infusions.
Let's talk about your ear. What happened there?
Again, my life, and I woke up one Sunday morning with a sinus infection. I'm sorry, through all of this, with the whole eyes things, I've had problems with my sinuses for quite a while, but it was after the eyes, I ended up, sarcoidosis caused me to have polyps inside my nose and in the back of my throat. Had the polyps removed, they were like, yes, this is definitely sarcoidosis, but you're already on all these other medications. That's what we would have prescribed for you. So, call us back if something changes. I woke up one Sunday with a very bad sinus infection, the usual signs and symptoms. And that's when I woke up that Sunday morning, and my boyfriend asked me something, but he was on this side of me and I did not hear him at all. And he thought I was mad at him. So it was later on the day, he was, throughout the day, he's like, okay, what did I do to make her mad at me that she wouldn't respond to me? And it wasn't until that later on that day that he asked, I said, I didn't hear you. And so he went over to that side and said something. I was like, I literally can't hear you. Went and saw had the same day appointment Monday, and they were like, oh, that's your sinus infection. Once your sinus is clear, here's an antibiotic, your hearing will return. 3 weeks later, found out my ear hairs are fine. I have no tumor pressing on the nerve. Further research, it's just one of the symptoms that you get, single-sided hearing loss caused by sarcoidosis.
That is just amazing to me. So you're,
Yeah.
So you're walking around. What your job is? You are a trainer.
Yes.
What kind of training do you do?
Software. Technically, the official title is applications trainer.
Yeah.
But so I train the full name is electronic health record system. I focus more on the practice management side, but when we do major upgrades and releases, both of us end up training the doctors, the nurses, and receptionists on how to use our system and what changes come into being.
You have the sarcoidosis all over your body.
Mhm.
How does that impact your ability to just live your life day to day?
It has an impact. And of course, the medication side effects play a greater role in how far I do things. The pain, like I said, it preventing me from, I used to knit as well. I don't do that anymore because my fingers get in the way. And then eventually after time, it really hurts to knit. I save my typing for work, so I don't play online video games as much as I used to, just because I need to be able to type at work. Just anything, to be honest with you, gripping a jar to try and open it. So I bought a jar opener, hearing aid, so that I can hear on the left side. And because the other part I realized with me not hearing, I was starting to lose how well I was enunciating words. I don't want to call it slurring my words, but I was losing just how well I was speaking. I parse out my time, to be honest with you. If I know I'm going to take a trip, I don't do much before the trip, and I'm definitely not doing a lot after it because I'm just that tired. And when I say trip, my doctors are in Gainesville, which is about a 2.5 hour drive from where I am. And going to see a doctor is a trip, because if I do it in a day, when I come back, I'm not going out to eat. I'm not, doing what I usually do.
You're not talking about going to Paris.
Yeah, I wish. I really wish. No, just going to see my doctor. My father lives 2.5 hours in the other direction. So even just that, most people, it's just a day trip. Like, no, just a day trip is a lot of energy.
The fatigue is real then. Do you take a lot of naps? Do you need the naps? Do you need extra sleep at night?
Yes. Problem is, you get to that point where you're so tired, even though you lay down, you can't fall asleep. Certain days I'm like that. I've laid down. I would love to go to sleep, and I'm just that tired to where I can't. But yeah, naps are real. Naps are required.
Garrie, you're doing a lot of work with the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, as we mentioned just a moment ago. And one of them is you're on the Women of Color Committee.
Yes.
For people who aren't up to speed on that, what is that committee's responsibility?
Sarcoidosis actually impacts the African-American women. I was going to say African-American community, and it does, but women are more impacted by the disease. That if there's going to be a higher hospitalization rate, higher mortality rate, it impacts African-American women about up to 13 times more often than African-American men, even though they are impacted by the disease. Unfortunately, my sister died from her sarcoidosis 3 years ago. That's what made me join FSR. And
we buried the lead. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. No, I actually, it's not that I don't talk about it, but it's really the reason I joined FSR and why I applied in the first place, because of her experience, the difference between her experience and mine. Then when I saw the Women of Color Committee come up, that really made me go, okay, I need to be a part of this, because of her experience and mine, and just in general, and talking with different African-American people and some of our residents, and going to see a physician. I don't want to say it's lack of exposure to certain diseases. And a lot of us are more prone to I'm always tired. I don't feel well. I don't have time to go to the doctor. So, he's just going to tell me, or she's just going to tell me what I already know. So I'm just not going to go. And I wanted to be a part of that committee to help get more word out there that this is not a disease that you can just be like, oh, it'll be fine. I'm tired. I'll be tired tomorrow. I'll be tired next week. Let's just wait it out. And it's this disease. You cannot just wait. The longer you wait, the more damage that's done, and you can't recover from that damage. Once it's damaged, it's damaged. So that's what made me decide to join up.
What was your sister's name?
Sharon.
And she had pulmonary sarcoidosis?
Pulmonary and skin. She never went in and got diagnosed for skin, but the spots on her face, it's like, you have the exact same thing. Go see a dermatologist. Don't have time. I don't feel good. So, and she was from the city that we were from, and her doctor only used prednisone. Steroids was their fallback. Even with my methotrexate, when I realized what it was doing for me, I was on the road from Gainesville back home calling her, go see your doctor, get methotrexate, I promise you. It impacted her lungs a way, I'm not sure if it was just due to time. She was a year and a half older than I was. So I'm not sure if it's just due to age, just due to if sarcoidosis had been impacting her a whole lot longer. So yeah, by the time they caught it, by the time, with steroids, her lungs couldn't take it. Literally, at the end, they said that we could not use any more medication to get any of the fluid off of her lungs. Her lungs are filling it faster than we can get it off of her. And that's what actually killed her.
Oh, that must have been so sad.
And it was devastating on the family because, that's not what's supposed to happen. And as my father said, you're not supposed to bury your children. So it was hard. It was hard.
So you stepped up and reached out to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, even though you had been dealing with Sarc yourself for a good long time at that point.
Yes.
And so now you are a fellow advocate, and our role as advocates is to help other sarcoidosis patients.
Yes.
You're on the Women of Color Committee. You're on the Patient Advisory Committee with me. And you are you a navigator as well?
I've applied to be a navigator. The application's closed in a couple of weeks, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does it feel like these days when your job is outreach and counseling other people with sarcoidosis, and what do you say to them?
It's a weird sensation, to be honest, because it's not where I saw my life going. Even though I'm a trainer, I'm an introvert, and training for me is easy because I'm talking about the software. It's not talking about me. In working with FSR, doing the advocacy, it's a different place for me to be because I'm talking about the disease, but I'm talking about my experience with it. So it's pushing me outside myself in ways that I'm not usually used to, even though I do speak publicly for a living. So it's a different place, but I have to admit that I do like it because getting the word out about sarcoidosis helps. Unfortunately, my coworker, I think she's okay with it because I was so vocal about it at work. She was running into some health issues and was diagnosed with pulmonary sarcoidosis end of last year. Yeah, and it was just like, oh, okay, I'm sad that you're part of my club, but I'm glad you got diagnosed.
Right.
Because otherwise, she was having some interesting things that kept coming, and went and had a biopsy.
So many people say they don't know anybody else that has sarcoidosis. You had a sister, and now you got a coworker.
Yes.
It's amazing. So your coworker is doing okay?
Yes, she's currently on methotrexate. And I think the last time they did a CT scan, things were looking good and they were going to keep her on the same dose. But she's in the first 6 months, I believe. So yeah, she's got that, the milestones to hit before you can really say things are going well.
Is she also an African-American woman?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it just keeps on coming then. But I'm sure that she was curious because she had you as a resource.
Yes. And it was one of those kind of different conversations, because it's not like she works in my department, but she's not like a close coworker. So it was one of these, can I talk to you for a second? And she goes, yeah, I'm going in and I don't know quite what to do or what to expect. So I put on the FSR hat. So the first thing you need to do is go out to the FSR website, go to stopsarcoidosis.org. Have your husband go out there as well, because your life is going to change, even though you haven't been feeling well and it's already been changing. If any medications are involved, then please don't do steroids, do something, see what you can do. Your life is going to change and how it impacts you and your family. And she's got grandchildren, and you need to do this research now. And don't think it can only stay within the lungs. You need to think whole body. Don't just discount, I'm older, this must be arthritis pain. It's like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So.
Are you doing support groups or anything like that?
I'm not. I've thought about it, and my introvert little gremlin's like, I've thought about it and looked, and I think this is the introvert part. There's nothing local to me,
Right.
And so I was just like, okay, I've never done the next step.
I was down the road a little bit with starting. We were going to have an event and maybe have a support group grow out of that here in my region in Roanoke, Virginia. And then the pandemic hit and everything got canceled.
Yeah.
And that was also about the time I started the podcast. And for me, I kind of feel like the podcast is my support group, because people are listening to you right now and they're hearing what you're saying. They're hearing what you're going through. And at least if they're looking for answers, they're hearing some of, what is quote unquote normal, if there is such a thing with sarcoidosis.
Yeah.
So they may have similar symptoms or similar issues with the prednisone or with the methotrexate or with the Remicade you've mentioned. All these things are things that I've been on as well. So initially, I'm just curious, because you said for a long time you didn't reach out to FSR, and you wrote an op-ed for your local paper, and you said you didn't really research sarcoidosis at first. Was it because you just didn't want to know, or you just kind of trusted your doctors to know what needed to be known, and you were going to take your medication and go on with your life? Go back to that time and think, what was going on with you then?
I trusted my doctor in that, stage 1. And again, my problem is I was so focused in on leukemia that that was my fear. And I had come home and I found one .gov website that mentioned sarcoidosis and lung involvement. I was like, okay, but leukemia was huge. So once I got that diagnosis of sarcoidosis, I was so relieved that it wasn't leukemia that I didn't push further on myself or the doctor. Because of course, now hindsight being 2020, even stage 1, I should have said, excuse me, are we sure I don't need to do something else, anything else? I didn't even think about getting a second opinion. And even the only thing I will say, thankfully, when I went back to my primary and she told me she didn't know anything about sarcoidosis and couldn't answer any of my questions and go see the surgeon, I ended up switching to an internist who knew about sarcoidosis. But even then, again, I put that trust in the physicians, didn't educate myself on it until things started changing.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you jump in, and I think I hear the same thing from people that and it can be kind of scary. I've been on some of the online threads where people just say such terrible, awful things about what's going on with sarcoidosis, but they're not saying it in a reasonable, thoughtful way, which isn't their job to do that. But I just didn't want to see it. And I didn't want to know. Terrible disease, terrible medication, blah, 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 blah. And then it would just stop. There wasn't any further explanation because people were just typing responses to one another, almost like reading a Facebook thread on a controversial issue. And people were just going after each other.
And nobody talking about that. Okay, yeah, sarcoidosis is not a fun disease, but there are ways to function. That yes, your life has changed, but this is not the end of it.
Right.
There's other things that you can do. So nobody likes to put that on the thread. That's not as interesting when you're looking at posts.
Right. Yeah. People just have to be so sensational with their posts, but they're probably on that thread because they're either bored or mad or both. And so you're seeing the worst of. So I just stopped looking, honestly. But I found that I probably should have looked further faster. And I'm hearing you say the same thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll admit, because I was surprised that I didn't know how long FSR had been around, that when I started searching for sarcoidosis originally, I only got the .gov sites, Medline, WebMD, and I just lost the name of the other one. That has a symptom checker on it that no doctor loves. And I did not start finding out about FSR until I probably was starting to search every week. I would go out and just sarcoidosis, pulmonary sarcoidosis. Let me see what I can find, because this is ridiculous that I know it's rare. And at that time, I think it was 200,000 in the US were being affected. It's like, but there has to be more. There has to be more. That this can't be just this couple of sites. And luck was on my side, and FSR popped up. Because I was starting to get to that point to where I think I'd been doing that for about a couple of months. I was starting to get frustrated because the information was always the same short little info, or like you said, the posts that were just, depressing me, making me feel like, okay, I'm not going to die tomorrow, but I'm going to pass soon. I don't want to hear this anymore.
Right.
But I found the FSR site.
Right. Well, Garrie, is there anything else you want to add to this conversation? I appreciate you kind of bearing your soul here with our listeners.
Honestly, if one person, okay, not one, but if more people would, if you're ever finding yourself going, this is, you're discounting your own symptoms, and you're thinking, well, it must just be allergies. Oh, I'm just tired, and I'm always tired. Sarcoidosis doesn't just impact the lungs. The heart can be impacted. Your eyes, the skin, bones, you name it, it can impact the body. And even with, I don't have time, I don't have the energy, just go to that one appointment and talk to your physician. Even if you're not the one having the symptoms, everybody talks to their friends, everybody talks to their family. You always hear, that common issue with that family member, with that friend. Talk to them, get them to go. Because even if it's not sarcoidosis, it could be anything and everything else. They need to go in and be seen. And it's not to say that don't trust your doctors, but if they tell you, okay, we think you have this, or we have confirmed this diagnosis, do your research. Go out there. The internet is huge. Yes, you're going to run into some information. That's when you do more research. Just because you found one answer, you found one source, you don't stick with just that one source. You look at everything as much as you can, and get that knowledge for yourself so you know what you're going to have to live with. And that helps better prepare you for your next office visit.
And
Hey, I found this thing.
find a doctor that is a specialist in sarcoidosis.
Yes.
There are lots of doctors who may have one or two sarcoidosis patients. That's not the same thing.
No, not even close to it. As you are well aware, sarcoidosis is so varied that there's a commonality amongst all of us, but how sarcoidosis impacts you is different than how it impacts me. And yes, it is a disease of granulomas, but how your body takes that granuloma, you really need someone who has a breadth of knowledge. Not just, like you said, one or twosie is not enough knowledge for this disease.
Right. Well, Garrie, thank you for joining me on the Sarc Fighter podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I love listening to you. I've watched your podcast before, so this is fantastic. This was fun.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
Poor Garrie went from an issue with her cute shoes to something unfortunately much more serious. I did not ask her if she ever got back to the opportunity to wear those shoes. I certainly hope she did. Maybe she can share that with us and I can give you an update in a future podcast down the line. But a couple of takeaways from the interview, the shoes notwithstanding. She said she should have pushed harder after that initial diagnosis. Her doctor was okay with no treatment, and for 4 years that seemed okay until, unfortunately, it wasn't. And that is a tough call because in half the cases, sarcoidosis does just go away on its own. And the doctor maybe didn't know a lot about sarcoidosis, thought maybe it would run its course, but then we see the other side of things, as Garrie told us with her sister, who passed from the disease because her lungs became so clogged with the granulomas that came from sarcoidosis. And that is a terribly, terribly sad story. And Garrie, I know it's been a little bit, but our thoughts and prayers are still with you. So thanks again to Garrie for joining me, bearing her soul, and of course for all the work she is doing for all of us by volunteering with the outreach at FSR. A reminder, the official Sarc Fighter song, you hear it in every episode in bits and pieces, is called Zombie by Mark Steyer and his band, the White Hot Lizards. Hear Mark's story, the story behind the lyrics, in episode 12. He is a fellow Sarc Fighter, and occasionally I will play for you the entire song at the end of an episode. I did that at the end of episode 61, so you might want to go back and listen. We release the podcast every other Monday. As I'm speaking today, my trusty dog Dougal, my rescue boxer, is curled up here in my office. Dougal and my auxiliary dog Pippa, my little terrier mix, make my life so much better. And I just love to have the company of my dogs. Please don't forget to go back and listen to a bonus episode on Sarc and COVID and another bonus episode on dealing with prednisone. Talked a lot about prednisone on this. In fact, Sanjay Shukla was one of the guests on that episode. And then the most recent bonus episode talks about the universal barriers that we all face with sarcoidosis, but how it's even more difficult for some people depending upon their background or the zip code in which they live. A very interesting perspective. So 3 bonus episodes if you just go back and search, and those are always in the show notes here on the Sarc Fighter podcast. There are rare opportunities there as all the right people come together in one place at the same time, and they all join here on the podcast in a place that they've probably never joined before. If you're new here and you just want to know what sarcoidosis is, go back and listen to episode 2 with Dr. Simon Hart. That is one of the most listened to episodes. If you want to know my deal, that's episode 1. And the backstory to the founding of the foundation for sarcoidosis research is episode 11 with Andrea and Redding Wilson, who started the foundation at their kitchen table more than 20 years ago. Andrea being a Sarc Fighter herself. Please send me an email if you'd like to appear on the podcast, or if you just want to let me know If you have a thought, a suggestion, if you think the podcast is helping, God, I can't tell you how much it means to me when someone just reaches out and says, thank you for the podcast, because it's made a big difference in my life, because that helps me know that all this effort is worth it, okay? And also follow the Sarc Fighter on Instagram and on the Facebook page. I do post updates and talk about things that I maybe don't have the time to talk about on the podcast. Little updates along the way, and just I actually let you know what's going on in my life day to day, and to the extent that you might be interested in that, that's all there. So thank you so much. It does help me reach more people and grow this podcast if you share it on your social media, if you would just grab the link and let people know what we're talking about here, and just tell one other person here in the sarcoidosis space. Thanks again to Garrie Farrow for joining me here today, and we look forward to an upcoming podcast with Dr. Sanjay Shukla. Until next time, keep fighting.
Learn to suffer, you feel pain someday. Learn endurance, your strength will fade away. Dead man walking, trying to keep up the pace. Dead man walking,